Good evening from a very nice evening in Tucson today. It's a pleasure to present our speaker, Dr. Lisa Young, who is perhaps the first nomad to give a presentation to AAHS. She got her BA from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor in history and anthropology, moved from Ann Arbor to Tucson, where she got her MA and her PhD at the University of Arizona. She then went back to Ann Arbor, where she has been a long-term teaching in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Michigan and a research associate in the Museum of Anthropological Archaeology. Well, she's back in Tucson, having left Ann Arbor temporarily. She and her husband are University Indian Ruin residential scholars for this fall, and I believe they're going to be here for much of the summer. So for some of you in Tucson, maybe you'll be able to see Lisa in person. She's going to talk about her interesting work and long-term work in Acknowledgements, and particularly the collaboration with the Hopi tribe. And so we're really excited and looking forward to this talk.
All right, thank you, Paul, for that nice introduction. Let me just screen share with you. So as Paul mentioned, I'm back in Tucson, and it's really been great to be back here because it's giving me a chance to kind of reflect on things that I was thinking about in graduate school, but where things where my thinking has gone over the last 30 plus years. And in coming back to Tucson, I was thinking about what it was like to be here in the 1980s. This was before the passage of NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, but Tucson and Arizona and the University of Arizona was an exciting place to be because people were already thinking about the relationship between archaeology and the tribes here in the state and indigenous people more generally. It was at the very beginnings, experimental stages of those thinkings, but looking back, I now see how many of the people who I was getting to interact with and the seeds of ideas have really come to fruition. And I had, one of the other things that was happening besides those discussions with in the field of archaeology is there were changes happening within museums as well. And the Arizona State Museum opened the Paths of Life exhibit while I was here as a graduate student. Still, the power of that exhibit, I think, really speaks to it being open for over 30 years. But that exhibit was really innovative for the time because it invited the indigenous communities that were being represented in that exhibit to have a voice in creating the exhibit. So one of the other things that I was lucky to do while I was here was be part of the Acknowledgements project under the leadership of Chuck Adams and Rich Lang. And this project really allowed me, and both Chuck and Rich were very supportive of me exploring my interests in not only the archaeology of that place, but also archaeologists' relationships with indigenous communities, particularly the Hopi tribe, and also the public in general. So this is going to be a slightly different talk. I'm actually not going to talk much about archaeology, but that relationship between archaeologists and indigenous communities, and thinking about the role of food in those community collaborations. So I have some case studies to share with you of projects that I've been involved in, and then some reflection, and then going to circle back around to the joy of being back in Arizona with thinking about some of these issues. All right, so let's see if my slides will move forward. All right. So the Acknowledgements area has been an amazing place to work because it has a very long history of archaeologists working with the Hopi tribe in particular. And for those of you who haven't been to Acknowledgements, it's in northeastern Arizona. You can see scenic Winslow, Arizona right here, and the park is just north of Winslow, and you can see the 4 Acknowledgements sites. If any of you were at Rich Lang's talk last week, you learned about many of these sites. But what's also important is situating the Hamalvi State Park in relationship to the Hopi reservation. And the Hamalvi sites were first found, I'm going to put in quotes, let me back up. The way anthropologists first learned about the Hamalvi sites were through an anthropologist named Jesse Walter Fuchs. And he was up on the Hopi Mesas collecting for museums and also collecting Hopi oral traditions. And several of the clans said, well, we come from Hamalvi. And he said, where's Hamalvi? And they said, you know, that place by the Little Colorado River where there's small hills, which we call Hamals, so it's place of the small hills. That's where our clans come from. So Fuchs went down, started excavating there, brought Hopi laborers in to help him find things. So my point here is that from the very beginning, there was a recognition by archaeologists that Hamalvi was a place with Hopi ancestral villages. And that relationship of the interactions between anthropologists and archaeologists and Hopi people has continued over the last century, but it's changed over time. For Fuchs, Hopi people were informants. It's where he got his information from. And he sort of then took that information and published it, took it back east to contextualize the things that he was finding at the Hamalvi sites. Now, there wasn't much professional work done at the Hamalvi sites after Fuchs, and unfortunately, the sites became well known in the area as places where people could find beautiful ancient pottery, so there was a lot of looting that happened. And during the 1970s and the beginning of the 80s, there were a lot of people very worried about the looting. And this is again where archaeologists and Hopi people and community members in Winslow came together to figure out a way to stop this looting. And what they eventually decided on was a creation of a state park to protect the sites. And as part of this developing the state park, there was also money that came to the Arizona State Museum and hiring Chuck Adams to then direct the Hamalvi Research Project. And that project started in the 1980s, has gone on for several decades, and I was privileged to be one of the first cohort of graduate students that was part of that project. And it was so exciting to be working on archaeological sites and have Hopi people come visit the sites. Some of my most distinctive memories of when I was in graduate school was when we were working at the sites and Hopi community members would come to visit and often come bless the sites and our work and things like that at the end of the field season. It really made a huge impression on me. Chuck also incorporated in educational opportunities for Hopi community members and youth in particular throughout the project. So there's been this close relationship, and starting in the early 2000s, what was interesting is the Hopi tribe started expressing an interest in helping make a more closer relationship with Arizona state parks to think about developing the park, interpreting it, and involving Hopi community members more. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second to talk about those details. But one of the things that many of you may remember happened is when the state of Arizona was in a financial crisis in 2009 and 10, that the park actually closed in 2010. And the reason it was able to reopen is the Hopi community said, no, this place is important to us. It's one of our gateways to the Hopi reservation and our living Hopi communities today. So the Hopi tribe actually put money forward to help reopen the Hamalvi State Park. Now, I hope several of you have looked at this map and realized this is an old map, and Hamalvi State Park that's what it's called. And on the map, it says Hamalvi Ruins State Park. And as part of the reopening, the tribe said, you know, we'd really like you to take out ruins out of the name. And there was lots of discussion about this, and it eventually was adopted as the park reopened. And the reason the Hopi tribe asked for that was because they said, you know, when you think of ruins, you only think of the past, and you think of people that are gone. And for us, as a community, Hamalvi represents our ancestral villages, but these are the footprints of our ancestors and places where we can still learn from them. So it's not ruins, it's these important places on our migrations, and that we can go to learn from our ancestors still. So this little bit of history is to just show you the importance of that changing relationship between archaeologists and Hopi people, and how it's changed over time, and how one of the things that the tribe has recently become interested in is these sort of management decisions about at the state park. So with the discussions in the early 2000s, there was actually and still in operation, a memorandum of agreement between state parks and the Hopi tribe to really work together at the park. And that memorandum of agreement went in at about the same time I was starting to develop a project that would be an educational and research project to bring students back out to Hamalvi. I hadn't been out to excavate for several years. And my idea was that we would work at two sites. One was a small early pueblo at Hamalvi that's out on the floodplain in this beautiful picture. It's one of my favorite views in all the world. And then the other site that we're working on here is the Pit House site that's right next to the visitor center. And I was like, you know, we're on a state park. There's these discussions about development and management. So I want the students on this project not only to learn about how to do archaeological field research, but also how to share it with the public. So that was part of my goals with the project. And that nicely meshed with this new agreement that had been reached between state parks and the Hopi tribe about Hamalvi. And then, much to my great good fortune, I had asked Susan Kwaptawa to be one of the members of my faculty team. And Susan had recently come home from working at the National Museum of the American Indian. She's actually a museums professional, and she was coming home looking for opportunities to work in museum-related fields, and then also on a variety of other projects. And so she was one of my faculty mentors to help with providing the Hopi perspective, helping co-teach with me the students during parts of our field program about Hopi, and then to help think about ideas of interpretation, how we could improve the interpretation and events and things like that at the visitor center at Hamalvi. And much to my good luck, the tribe actually hired her to be the liaison during the same time between state parks and Arizona State Parks and the Hopi tribe. So Susan got to wear two hats, and by wearing those two hats, we could actually do several different projects at the park and really get them going. And my project was a 3-year project between 2006 and 2008. And I'm actually really proud of a lot of the different projects we were able to do, including some exhibit work within the visitor center. We also, with Doug Gann, with funds from the Arizona Humanities Council, were able to create an audio tour of Hamalvi 2. And at the time, which was 2007, you had to get a little special equipment to listen to it. But now you can just go scan a QR code at the park and listen to it right on your phone. It takes you on a very nice tour. This podcast one of our goals was to have both archaeologists' voices and Hopi people's voices, because there wasn't good interpretive material where you could hear both perspectives at Homology. And then we were able to do a few other projects. One of the things that Susan wanted to do was to think about how to integrate Hopi people's perspective into the resources that were already happening at the park. And so one of the things she decided to do was to take the park's annual open house, whose name was Archaeology Day, because it started with archaeologists at the park and tours of archaeological sites. And over time, the park had added in some demonstrations, some Hopi pottery demonstrations and other talks and things like that. But what Susan wanted to do was give it a name that would encompass what was happening at Homology. And instead of calling it Archaeology Day, she talked to a bunch of community members and they said, well, why don't you call it something in Hopi that means working together, that joint effort? And so the name that was suggested was Savoyki Day. And that's what the open house is still called today. So this was the first time that all of us came together to sort of re-envision what this open house would look like, where you'd have archaeologists and Hopi people. Visitors would be able to learn about from all those people at that work at the park, to bring sort of interpret the past and then make connections to Hopi culture today. So that included me giving archaeological tours, and Rich Lang and Chuck Adams are often there also giving tours. The first year, Chuck was also out in the field. And this picture shows me actually standing in an archaeological pit at the pit houses. And one of the reasons I like this picture is you can see the two little girls up front. They are Hopi girls, and they have just been participating in a race, a running race that was also part of the Savoyuki event. And one of the things that the runners got to learn about was Hopi philosophy of running. Demonstrations were also done, and one of the highlights of Savoyuki Day is when Gwen Satala and often her brother Dee joins her, and they do a traditional Hopi pottery firing. And Gwen is a ranger, a seasonal ranger at Homology, and really helps. She is from a very well-known Hopi pottery making family, and really helps also add that Hopi perspective to what's going on at the park. The other thing that the park staff had decided to do, based on a suggestion, I think, from someone at Hopi, was they had decided to have a corn roast. One of the traditional ways to eat sweet corn at Hopi is by having it roasted in an underground pit. And the park said, great, let's do it. But the way they were roasting the corn was to bring in a backhoe, dig the pit each year, heat up the pit with lots of wood, put corn stalks down, put the corn on, cover up the sort of pit, which was really a trench, and then open it up. And then each year they would then close up that trench. And the corn was good, but Hopi people were like, well, you know, this could be better. And so one of the Hopi people who was giving a talk at the park, Michael Lomombeya, he looked at me at one of the years that I was out there, and he said, you know what, we should just build a traditional Hopi corn roasting pit. And I was like, great, I've got the students who can help with this, let's do it. And so the next year, which was the last year of my project, I said, okay, let's build the pit. And the challenge for this was we needed to bring in a Hopi elder who was knowledgeable about how to build this pit to help us build it. And these pits are what archaeologists call bell-shaped pits. So it looks like a bell in cross section with its narrow bit at the top, and then it flares out as you go deeper in the pit. And then it also has a vent in the side. So I, as an archaeologist, was like, okay, I've excavated bell-shaped pits. I want to know how one's made. I want to know how it's used, all those sorts of things. So during the summer of 2008, Hopi elder, there are a couple of people that the park talked to, but he zeroed in on Gwen Satala's dad, Justin Satala, and here he is here. And you can see him supervising 3 students. The 2 that are seated are students from my program, and I'm actually very proud to say that one has finished their PhD and the other went on to do a bunch of other things. This is now working on finishing her PhD. And the person standing in the orange shirt is Mike Adams, and he was intern from the Hopi tribe that summer, who came out to work with the park to learn about park management and interpretation, and that was part of how the Hopi tribe was increasing involvement of the Hopi community at Hammalabi. So what they're doing here, and it was so interesting to have Justin explain to us what was going on. They're digging the top part of that, what I as an archaeologist would call a bell-shaped pit. And Justin said, no, that's the neck of the pit, that narrow part going down. And then once it got deep enough, Justin said, okay, now it's time to make the stomach of the pit. And this is one of those students down, they picked the smallest student of this group, the shortest student, to go down into the pit and dig out the edges to make it bell-shaped. And they didn't flare out the edges that much. And so I asked Justin about it, and I was like, but shouldn't it be more flared out than that? And he's like, no, patience, that will happen. It's like, okay. And what happened then was the pit dried out for a few weeks, and then it was ready for the roast. And the way the roast works is, this is the pit right here where the fire is, and this sort of trench here is the vent, because to get a fire going in a pit that's about 5 feet deep, you need to let the air in. So that's what this vent is. So you can see the fire down there, and then the fire in the pit. And Justin asked us, when we were starting the fire, he said, I really need some greasewood. And I said, great, I know where to get the greasewood. And he said, I want it because that is a wood that burns very hot and doesn't make a lot of ash. So it's really great to start the fire. And then we would add in more wood that was sort of what the park had been able to acquire, things like pinon and juniper and those sorts of things. All right, so we're heating up the pit. It heats up for several hours, usually at least 2, if not 3 or 4. And I said to Justin, how will we know when the pit's hot enough? He said, when the earth at the top turns ashy white. And I was like, really? And sure enough, not long after that, it got ashy white. And in the process of heating it up, the other thing that had happened is parts of the walls had also collapsed in. And I was like, Justin, are you worried about this? And he's like, no, he had planned for that to be happening. That was how the pit was expanding out as it was heated up. So after the walls of the neck turned that ashy white, then we didn't put any more wood in, and we let the fire sort of die down. And then after it's died down to very hot embers, then you put corn stalks on top of it because you don't want to burn the corn. And then you start loading the corn in the pit. So here's Gwen Satala up front here in the shorts, putting corn in the pit. You can see Rich Lang in the background, and then some of my students also helping. And I think this first year we roasted over 300 ears of corn in this pit. It really holds a lot of corn. After all the corn's put in, there's a little bit of water put in, corn stalks on the top. And I should also say that the first ear of corn that goes in with a prayer. And as people put corn in the pit, they're often saying thank you in Hopi and lots of wishes for a good roast. Then the pit is closed up. We had metal to put over the top. And what you can also see is the vent is closed. That's what this is here. So here's Justin and Gwyn closing the pit, and we covered it then with earth to seal it up there. And the pit stays like that all night. Roasts overnight, and as the sun comes up the next morning, we open up the top layer of the pit and open up the vent, let the steam come out because it's really hot in the pit. And then the ears of corn start coming out, and you can see Justin again. And then he has brought some of his grandsons and other people to come help unload the pit. And I have to tell you that the smell of the pit when it opens is amazing. It's this steamy, hot, corn smoky smell that comes out of the pit. And it's hot, and especially for this pit, when as you get lower and lower, somebody has to go in. So people would be, the person in there would be unloading the corn, and then we would have to take breaks because it's like this amazing sauna inside that pit. And then what happens is the first ear of corn is actually shared with everybody who helped with the roast and everybody who's there for the opening. And this is part of the reason why I called this talk Sharing an Ear of Corn, because the person who explained this sharing the ear of corn to me was actually the Hopi intern who helped, Mike Adams, who helped build the pit. And he turned to me and said, Lisa, everybody who helps with the pit and who is here for the opening gets to take a bite of this first ear of corn. And that's when I realized that this project was much more than food for the open house, that it was this whole working together. It really epitomized this idea of Savoyuki Day for me. So the other thing that's been amazing about this pit is that my field project ended after this first roast. But I have been able to come back in years to help with this corn roasting pit. So here I am several years later coming back. My job usually as an archaeologist is to help clean out the pit and to collect the wood for the pit, and then just to be there to help be a supportive person for the roast. And 2008 and 2009, Justin Satala was there to help us with the roast. But then there was the park closing, and afterwards he wasn't able to come. So Gwyn and I did that first roast, just the two of us. Well, not just the two of us, we had lots of help, but we were the ones sort of figuring out how to do it in 2011. And I remember the thing that we had to do was call Gwyn's dad and say, we can't get this thing lit. How do you do it? And so he was telling us you wrap some of the twigs in a paper bag, and then you light it and put it in. But one of the things that Gwyn told me is that her dad all along was really saying to her, now pay attention to these details because you're going to need to take this over. So this pit has provided me this opportunity to come back and work with the park. And not only is Gwyn there, but the then park manager is there. And then one of the park ranger's wives is there helping. So it's a way for all of us to come together and work together and to continue to learn from each other. So I want to just tell you a couple things that I learned from this corn roasting pit. And I realized that my ideas about this pit have really changed over time. I first came to it with my archaeological glasses on. And so the questions that I was thinking about as an archaeologist was, how is this pit made? I've excavated bell-shaped pits. I want to know how they're made. And so I learned something about how the pit was made, at least for in this roasting context. And then I wanted to know what were the traces of the pit use. I spent a lot of time digging out and measuring the fill of the pit, the sort of ash layers, and then the collapse from the sides that had come in, the color of the soil, those sorts of things. And then I also wanted to know about wood use, because I really noticed that first year that a lot less wood was being used in this bell-shaped pit than when the park had used those trenches that they dug before. And unfortunately, this is the thing that I never figured out to quantify very well, except in a picture. So this is the pile of wood for one of the roasts that we had beforehand. And I didn't even do this systematically enough to take the picture looking in the same direction and from the same place. But this is the pile of wood after the roast, and you can see all the corn stalks that we've taken out of there. So it's not a great estimate, but you can see there's not a huge amount of wood that's been used to do this corn roast, even though hundreds of ears of corn were being roasted. And then, of course, I am an archaeologist, so the other thing that archaeologists think about is how do things fall apart? And what happened with the original pit, so this is the pit in 2008, I showed you this picture before, and then this is the pit in 2015, so this was after 7 roasts. And what you can see is this space between the pit itself and the trench for the vent has collapsed, and this was fairly narrow. And so this pit became too dangerous to use. It was also deep, and parts of it were really starting to collapse in, and I'd been monitoring how the size of the pit changed. And there was, right before this last roast, there was actually a big collapse in the pit. It was just getting too dangerous to be in. So, because I'd taken a lot of notes on how the pit was made, and my students had written reports on it too, what happened in 2016, we've been trying to get Hopi community members to coordinate and tried to get funding to bring them in to help with build another roasting pit. And unfortunately, the pieces just weren't coming together. So the park was like, what are we gonna do? And I was like, it's not gonna be the same, but I can help you build another pit that you could at least do a roast in. So these are 2 students who were working in the summer of 2016 on Chuck Adams Field School. And I said, hey, Chuck, can I borrow a few of your students? And so we went out one day to make a new corn roasting pit at Hamalvi. And I shared with the students everything that I had learned from Justin, and then some other writings on the Hopi corn roasting pits and some videos where they could learn from Hopi people's voice about the corn roasting pits. So the student who's in the front here is actually in the pit. She's about as deep as this pit. It's a smaller pit, so it's not quite as deep as it went. And then this other student is in the vent area. And one of the things I did was to try to expand that area between the top neck of the pit and the vent area. So hopefully it won't fail in that area. And we have used this pit in 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019. So it's doing pretty well for 4 roasts. And the other thing we did was I said to Gwen, hey, you're a potter. I'd really love to put some stones in the bottom of this pit. And so we had some stones to put in, and then we went down to the river and collected clay. And I thought this was going to be really easy to put the stones in and then get the clay in between it, but we realized the clay was really sticky. And so it was actually a lot more work to get it in as mortar. We probably weren't doing it right, but it worked out okay. But here's Gwen sort of cursing at me like, Lisa, you want me to spread this clay around in the bottom of this pit? But we had a lovely day together down at the river, learning from each other, talking about the clay, talking about the stones, talking about making this new pit. And the other thing we were able to do together was to write an interpretive sign about this roasting pit. And you can it doesn't identify our two different voices, but you can see them if you look carefully. There's Hopi, the Hopi word for sweet corn is in there. And then wherever you see something that's not so technical, that's sort of talking about people, that's Gwyn adding that in there, because I was doing my little technical thing about how do we make the pit, how do we use the pit. So this discussion right in here, where it's talking about putting the corn in the pit and saying thank you and good wishes. And then this description of the passing the ear around. Those are things that Gwyn really wrote, and then we incorporated in this sign. Unfortunately, the park hasn't produced this sign yet, but they have it and you can see it. So if you are able to get to Hammalabi for Savoyiki Day, it happens at the first weekend in August each year. It didn't happen last year because of COVID. And I don't know if it's going to be able to happen this year, and they probably aren't going to do the roast if they are going to have Savoyiki Day. But keep your eyes out on the Arizona State Park website about Savoyiki Day, and I hope soon you can actually go taste this corn. All right, so part of the reason I'm telling you this story is because this pit the corn roasting pit is amazing. It's been a great learning opportunity for me and my students, but it also helped me think about Hopi corn and Hopi food in a very different way. And this is, again, thanks to Gwyn Satala. And over the years of Gwyn and I working together, besides interpreting, building a new pit, roasting the corn together, she's also shared with me the importance of this pit. And so Gwyn's perspective on the pit is not only is it something to do to help visitors to the park learn about Hopi culture, but for her, it's about the memory of her father and all that he taught her. And so again, here's the first roast, and he was involving her in this roast and saying, remember this, remember how to do this, because you'll be responsible. And Gwyn has now taken it on herself to oversee these roasts, although she always brings in Hopi people when she can to help with parts of it, to give the blessings, to help unload, things like that. But over the years, she's shared with me that she actually feels like her dad is with her when she does the roast now, that he's there sort of guiding her along. So it creates this connection for her with her family. And if you think about it, it's amazing when you have corn prepared in this traditional way, because you're also being able to taste corn in the way that Hopi people have been preparing corn for centuries, sweet corn. Now, one of the things I forgot to tell you is that the sweet corn that we use is actually from a farm in Camp Verde, where the park purchased it. So it's modern day sweet corn, but Hopi people also have their own sweet corn. It's not ready when we're doing the roast, and most sweet corn that's grown on the Hopi reservation is for family use. It's not for sale. So I've never tasted Hopi sweet corn, but still the process of cooking it in this way. And so Gwyn has also involved family members in this, and I was very honored to be part of the roast in 2019. And not only is Gwyn here and her son, who's been involved in many of the roasts, but her grandson came to join us. So there are now multiple generations of the Satala family who have been involved in this roast. All right, now I want to transition to some other ears of corn that I've had the privilege to learn about from Hopi people. And this now shifts out of Hammalabi to thinking about museum collections. And one of the things that the corn roasting pit helped me understand was this sort of community coming together to roast the corn, so in the preparation of corn. But I was also really interested in the corn seeds itself. As I mentioned, the Hopi have their own variety of sweet corn, and learning more about Hopi farming. And not just in the past, as I've been thinking about it as an archaeologist, but sort of contemporary Hopi farming. And the other thing is, one of the things that happens in archaeology with collaborative projects is there's lots of projects when we're in the field. You can see how this project started when I was in the field, and the pits allowed me to come back and continue to work collaboratively with Arizona State Parks and with Gwynn on this project. But I also live most of the time in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And so I wanted to think about other projects that we could think about as amazing educational opportunities for the students I was working with at Michigan, and also build on the collaborative relationships that I had been able to develop with the projects at Homology. So I'm really lucky at the University of Michigan. We have one of the largest ethnobotany collections in the United States and one of the largest collections of indigenous corn. And I knew there was Hopi corn in the collections. And so this is the drawer that I was pulling out as I was learning these collections. This is the drawer of Hopi sweet corn. And this corn was collected in 1935. And so I decided for a new class that I was teaching called Museum Anthropology that I wanted the students to be able to work with a collection. And I decided to have them work with the ethnobotanical collections that had been collected from the Hopi Mesas, and we zeroed in on one project. And I'll tell you about the class in just a little bit, but I want to first tell you about this amazing, amazing collection. So that's one of the drawers. All the drawers above it are also corn that were collected from the southwestern United States, an amazing collection. And these ears were actually collected, as I mentioned, part of a project in 1935 that was directed by Volney Jones, who's sitting in the chair. This is a picture of him after 1935 when he was working on the Awadabi project, also on the Hopi Reservation. And for anybody who knows the history of the Awadabi project, the excavations that happened there in the 30s, you will recognize this chair because it's often in pictures of the Awadabi crew. Volney Jones was working with Alfred Whiting, who had been a student at the University of Michigan, had recently gotten his degree, his master's degree in taxonomic botany, and was looking for a job. And Volney Jones helped get him a job as a temporary curator at the Museum of Northern Arizona in Flagstaff. And Alfred Whiting went and spent the summer in there, and then he and Jones sort of came up with this idea that they wanted to interview Hopi farmers to see what they had harvested in the fall of 1935. And so they got some funding to do this from the University of Michigan and some help from the Museum of Northern Arizona. And so Volney Jones actually drives out to the Hopi Mesas in October of 1935. And I want you to think about what he was driving through. He was having to drive through the Central Plains, and this is during the Dust Bowl days. So he's driven across the Central Plains, seen areas that the fields were just devastated, and he arrives at Hopi, and there are beautiful cornfields there. Now, Jones and Whiting realize that they cannot do this project without help, so they hire a Hopi man who'd been working at the Museum of Northern Arizona. This is Edmund Nekwaptua. And I am apologizing. I'm terrible at pronouncing Hopi last names, so I've butchered all of them that I've said tonight, so apologies. But Edmund could be their translator. He helped them negotiate permissions to go in and interview people about what they'd harvested, and then to actually collect corn, beans, squash, gourds, some spices, a variety of different Hopi plants that Hopi people grew and used. And then Edmund himself, we think, did many, many of the interviews. Now, the reason this collection is so amazing is, one, it's a huge collection, and what Jones and Whiting were doing was collecting enough so that they could create roughly duplicate collections for both museums. So there's a collection from the 1935 crop survey at the Museum of Northern Arizona, and then there's a collection at the University of Michigan that I showed you the drawers from. In their interviews, they also kept detailed notes of the people they interviewed and the crops that they were collecting. And I want to show you the notes from those interviews, because this is one of the things that was so amazing for me as I started to learn about this collection. So this is an example of one of the interviews. This is one of their later interviews. You can see up in the upper left-hand corner here, it's interview 50. And they interviewed 56 Hopi households and then 3 Navajo families also. And so this is a fairly brief interview, but what you can see is the village that they're in, the date of the interview, the person that they interviewed, the village where he is, his clan affiliation, his wife, her village where she is originally from, her clan affiliation. And then it notes that they are living at Sapulavi because of the store that Hal is running. And this is they make this note because this is unusual, instead of usually what happens when traditionally when a Hopi couple gets married, they go live at the wife's village. So this is commenting on that, that's unusual. And then this is what has been harvested for this household. So you have beans and watermelon, and then muskmelon, and then a variety of different types of corn. And then for many of the households, Jones and Whiting collected from those households. And so this is some ears of blue corn that are at the University of Michigan. There are equivalent ears of blue corn at the Museum of Northern Arizona. And this is the sheet that they created that describes information about this plant that they've collected. So you can see the collection information up here. Those are the accession numbers. The one that's typed is the Museum of Northern Arizona catalog number, and then the one that's handwritten is the Michigan number. Something about the corn, you can see that, again, the reason I'm showing you this is it says it was grown by Sikakaku, and this is Hal Sikakaku here. And so it doesn't say how, but it's from the Sikakaku family. And I love that in 1935, they were using mimeograph sheets because it reminds me of my elementary school days. A little bit of information here about the corn. So I show you this interview because this, remember Susan Sekikwatawa that I worked with on the Hopi project? This is her grandfather and her grandmother that these were collected from. And this type of information is just very, very exciting to see, to be able to open a drawer of corn, to look at the corn and say, wow, this is actually, I can know the name of the farmer from 1935. So I used this in a class. The students got to learn about the collections. They put information into an online catalog. We only did the descriptive information on the plants and not the interview information, because that had too much personal information, and I didn't want to make that publicly available until we'd had conversations with Hopi community members about whether that was appropriate or not. So we did not put that online. But the reason the students did this is because I wanted them to learn about the changing histories of collections, the collection as it was done in the 1930s, and then have them an opportunity for them to learn directly from Hopi people. And so what we did is we set up a situation where the students could video conference. Now, I want to tell you that this picture is from 2014. So before we all lived on Zoom, I was able to take that amazing technology that's part of our everyday lives now, unfortunately, and the students were able to learn from Susan. This is Susan's giving them a talk about introducing them to why corn is so important to Hopi people in terms of their origin stories, in terms of baby naming ceremonies, sharing all that with them. And then she helped arrange that student teams got to talk to Hopi farmers. And that's what's happening here. You see a picture of Susan's house where she's able to get to talk to Hopi farmers. And I wanted to do this with students at the University of Michigan who are, again, in the Midwest. And so think about Midwesterners' view of corn. I grew up in the Midwest, and so I just think of miles of cornfield and being grown in the States. And I think about it all as a commodity crop, and then the little bit of sweet corn that we get to eat from the farmer's market during the summer. So it's all about food. And what happens is the Hopi farmers, by learning this cultural context, took the students on this journey, and it really transforms their views of the collections. Because when they first see it, it's like, oh, corn. Well, it's nicely colored corn, but it's just corn. It's not just corn. And this is a quote from one of the students. And it shows that it transformed those ears of corn. So sharing those ears of corn into something else, recognizing once again how important corn and crops and farming are to the Hopi community, and that it's the act of farming is like raising a family. And so the corn and the crops are taken care of like a child. So this is an amazing educational opportunity for my students. I love teaching this class. I've now gone on to not only work with the Hopi community, but communities in the Great Lakes, the Anishinaabe communities. The conversations, one of the things that Susan was able to share out with me is the conversations then also, that being able to talk to the students also sparked conversations amongst the Hopi farmers too that were part of the project. And the Hopi farmers were interested in this history, interested in the history of farming, both families and clans and the villages. And that's the history was also a very powerful message about the connecting with ancestors and the past, and the importance of farming for Hopi identity, and who Hopi people are today. They also, the farmers amongst themselves also discussed the importance of continuing to grow and protect Hopi seeds and to seed save. So not just to go buy seeds at the store, but actually save the Hopi seeds, which Hopi people have been doing for generations and generations, but to really drive home and talked amongst themselves about the continued importance of Hopi seeds and protecting them, because Hopi farmers are very worried about contamination from genetically modified seeds as well. And they also asked if the seeds could be brought back to Hopi to be grown. And here's Susan visiting the collections. Actually, she's photographing the corn from her that was collected from her family. When we're at the Museum of Northern Arizona, we got to go together to do that. But we got some chance to then, once again, talk about the importance of that corn for Hopi people. So this project, again, sharing these ears of corn, thinking about food, thinking about how both museum collections and archaeological opportunities can really create these collaborative opportunities to share information with each other. And that's one of the things that I've really learned from these projects, is how we come to them with different perspectives. But when we all sit down and think about our strengths and the skills that we bring, it can bring about these amazing collaborative opportunities. And working with the Hopi Collections then opened a door for me where I was also invited in on a project with Great Lakes groups called the Anishinaabe communities, which is three groups, three sort of tribes and groups of tribes. So the Potawatomi, the Ojibwa, and the Odawa all call themselves Anishinaabe. And for these communities, seeds are also important. And I put up this quote again, and it's by a woman who her mother's standing there holding some corn that was collected by one of her relatives and donated to the museum. Her daughter's next to her. And again, you can see this idea of seeds and corn being referred to as family and the importance of that. And this is particularly important. Museum collections are particularly important for many groups in the Great Lakes because they no longer grow their traditional varieties of corn. Many of those seeds have gone out of being farmed. So we are actually starting conversations about, can we take museum collections and grow them out? And that's a whole nother talk. So I just want to sum up that the working with, being able to work with food, which we all eat and we all share, and we all know that it's wrapped up with our cultural identity and traditions, has been this amazing platform for developing collaborative projects, both with museum collections and in the context of an archaeological state park and ancestral Hopi State Park. And this ability has created this platform to work together over more than 15 years. I just feel very blessed to be able to do that. The other thing that's made these collaborative projects very satisfying for me, and I think created this dialogue around them, is that it involves students, and that educational platform created a different space for those conversations to have. That often happens with consultations with archaeological sites or consultations with around museum collections. And I just want to end, I'm going to skip that slide. I just want to end with some quick acknowledgements. And I am at the UIR, the University Indian Ruins, and this is one of the signposts in the neighborhood where I often go walking. And this acknowledgement is one, to thank the School of Anthropology at the University of Arizona for this opportunity to be here this semester. I can't think of a more amazing place to live out the end of this pandemic than here at University Indian Ruins. But I also want to acknowledge this space where I am, and the original Hohokam residents of this space who created what on the signpost is called Indian Ruins, that for picking this amazingly beautiful place to establish their original communities or their communities here, and then also acknowledging their descendants who are still steward this land and that the University of Arizona is built on. And then I love this sign because it also says Potawatomi, one of those Anishinaabe communities. And I want to acknowledge that the University of Michigan also started because of Indigenous people's generosity. Anishinaabe communities, when they were signing treaties that were ceding land, said, we are ceding this land so that you can create an educational institution. And that was the very foundation, the origins of the University of Michigan. So acknowledging all the Indigenous communities who have contributed to the educational institutions that I am part of. And I also want to thank all the Hopi community members who were patient and generous enough to share corn with me, and also with Foley Jones and Alfred Whiting. I can't imagine how annoying sometimes their questions were and how annoying my questions were, but we are all richer because of the knowledge that they shared with all of us. So I want to thank you all for coming and listening, and I'm going to stop screen sharing, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks so much, Lisa. That was a very important talk about a very important topic. We all should be doing those collaborations and expanding them more if we're not. So thank you. I really appreciate it. We do have questions, so I am just going to start. Let's see. John Welch says, thanks, Lisa. We're all richer for shifts that have welcomed the generous sharing by Hopis and other indigenous peoples of knowledge about their ancestral homes and landscapes. Is there material evidence of continuing use of the Homolavi sites following the most intensive use of those homes, like in the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s?
Well, thank you, John, for coming. And John is one of the people who I got to interact with in graduate school, who really has gone on to do amazingly collaborative work. Thank you for asking about continued use of the Homolavi area. As you know, I am not the best person to answer this, but if Chuck and Rich are on, they might be able to answer it. But my understanding is yes, Hopi people continued to come down to Homolavi, and also the area that is commonly called Rock Art Ranch. There are many stories of people coming down and gathering resources along the Little Colorado River in the area of Rock Art Ranch. If I remember, what Chuck and Rich have taught me is that occasionally there's much later pottery found at some of the scattered sort of breakage of pottery in those various areas. And then there's clearly Hopi oral tradition of uses of that areas, including people talking about running from the Hopi Mesas 60 miles down to Winslow to collect the mail, and then running back in the same day, which is amazing to think about, running 120 miles. So yes, there is some evidence of continued use of Homolavi since it was part of the migration routes for certain clans. So thank you, John, and thanks for being here.
All right. Archaeologically, do you find the air vent in association with the pits?
That's a great question. The bell-shaped pits that I have excavated are from an earlier time period, the basket maker time period, so sort of 600 to 800-ish AD, at least in the Homolavi area, basket maker Pueblo 1. Those are used as storage pits, and they do not have any vents in the side. Archaeologically, the corn roasting pits are often, will be hard for archaeologists to find, not impossible, but they're usually located by the cornfields, and archaeologists are primarily excavating in villages. So we're not going to be able, they're not going to be as visible in the archaeological record, just because we're often not excavating those fields. I mean, one of the few places that I've seen a beautiful field excavated is here, actually in Tucson at the early agricultural sites. So yeah, so but there's some corn roasting pits on the Hopi Mesas that have been used for generations. So it's a very long tradition.
All right. I'm guessing the earth kept the heat and more firewood wasn't necessary in those pits. I'm just beginning to learn to cook with firewood. Can you comment about that at all?
I'm no expert on cooking over fire, but yes, indeed, the pit itself, and it's a sort of roasting and steaming process that way. But yeah, it's the the earth is all around and helps insulate it. And then the sealing of it. So we put that, you saw that metal sheeting, and then we put earth over it. And over the last several years, one of the other things that Gwyn has started to do is to add clay to really seal it around the edges. So it really seals in that heat, and it's a sort of steaming process too. So it's not only the roast, but the steaming going on. So yeah.
Okay, I have a couple related to that too. So another person asked, does one of the photos of the corn roasting pit show the greasewood? I see the last photo with those long stems and leaves. Not sure what that is. Is that greasewood?
Yeah, so thanks for asking that question. No, the greasewood burns all the way down. We usually try to get some fairly dry greasewood. What you saw when I was showing the pile of wood with the corn out with the greens out in front, those were the corn stalks that we had put on the top, and then the corn stalks from the bottom. The bottom ones we often leave in the pit, but the ones on the top we have to pull out the corn. And those also might be the things that are left over from when we cleaned out the pit. One of the things I've also learned about the pit is how well things are preserved in the bottom in it. So often when I go back to clean it out the next year, I'll find bits of stalks, ears of corn, because we often leave 1 or 2 ears of corn in the pit, and they look like they were just roasted like last week. They're dried out, but they're still perfectly preserved in the pit, which has also been interesting for me to think about with bell-shaped storage pits, that the rodents really aren't getting into those bell-shaped storage pits. The only thing I found in them when I'm cleaning them out is crickets. And then one year when it was really wet, there were a bunch of frogs that had gotten into the pit and were sort of nice down there, keeping themselves cool. So we actually did a little frog rescue, or toad rescue. I think it was toads that they were when we were cleaning out the pit.
Okay, and this is a bit related as well. In traditional Hopi villages, is corn prepared like this for ceremonies or also for everyday use?
So that's an excellent question. Thank you for asking. My understanding, and I won't say that I'm an expert, is that these corn roasts are family or sort of group events. Sometimes now they're done on the village level, but it's like a big roast feast celebration. I don't think the corn that's roasted in these pits is used for ceremonial purposes, but what happens, and this happens at Homolovi too, is if there's leftover corn, then families will take it home and often dry it. And Hopi women have told me that the dried sweet corn stores for a long period of time, and you can then grind it or put it in stews, and so it's used in sort of everyday use. And one of the things that excited me so much when I saw the collection at the University of Michigan, one of the ears of dried sweet corn had a hole in the stalk part at the top, and so I knew at some point it had been hung. But each family sort of has their own traditions, since this is more of a family tradition. So different families may do different sorts of things with the sweet corn. So that's my understanding. But again, this is where I really like to have, I'm not an expert on this, so this would be a great question. If you get to come to Homolovi for the corn roast, there's often Hopi people there, and I would encourage you to ask them how their family uses sweet corn in their dishes.
Great. Do we know the etymology for the Hopi word for sweet corn? Tupevu, or however you say that.
Yeah, I'm actually about to start a project with a linguistic anthropologist, and Susan Sekakwatawa and I, and so I don't know the etymology for the word. And again, there's there's a Hopi dictionary, and there's Hopi people here that are much more knowledgeable than me, who is terrible at remembering Hopi words and pronouncing them. I'm just terrible at it. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that question.
Okay, Barbara Mills says, great talk, Lisa. In general, what is the amount of time that corn seed would be viable for replanting?
Thank you, Barbara. Another person who has done amazing collaborative work, especially also with her husband, TJ, and influenced me thinking in my graduate years. And so in terms of the viability of seeds in the collections, that's a really great question. And it's something that we're going to try to find out, working with the Anishinaabe communities at Michigan. It's definitely a big topic of conversation. I'll tell you one story. Last year with the Anishinaabe communities, we developed a collaborative garden, and one of the community members that we've been working with said, hey, why don't we get some seed from the USDA GRIN storage area? That is one of the community seeds that they wanted to plant. And when we got that seed, it hadn't been planted for nearly 20 years. And the viability on that seed, it was actually a blue corn that had been grown by the groups in Illinois. And the last time it had been grown out was the early 2000s. And that seed still had more than 80% viability. We don't know what's going to happen as we go further back in time. I would predict that the corn that's harder, so the flint corn or popcorn, might have a better chance of still having something that was viable to germinate. I have been told that beans can be viable after decades. And then someone from the USDA was also out, who was part of their seed storage, was out looking at the collections. And she told me that cotton, she's seen cotton seeds that was viable for over 100 years. And there is Hopi cotton in the University of Michigan collections that might be interesting to try to germinate. So we'll see. Paul, do you have any other ideas about how long things take to germinate, how long seeds can preserve to germinate?
It depends on the seed. Generally, cultivated plants don't survive nearly as long as as wild plants, as obviously wild plants need to deal with the vagrancies, whereas of nature, droughts, etc. Whereas cultivated plants, you want to have inhibitions to germination not be there, because you want them to germinate when you plant them. I think it's going to be less likely. I mean, you can always do a germination test and find out, but a lot of the really longer lasting seeds have been in really superb conditions of very cold temperatures that can keep these seeds lasting a long time. That's not the case with the UNM collections. Give it a try, but I would be a little hesitant to think so.
It's interesting to think of in terms of corn that most of the farmers in the Midwest are buying, because it's hybrid corn, and it's been bred to germinate really fast and grow really fast with the fertilizer and the water and things like that. But Hopi corn, is meant to be stored. Many families are storing for multiple years, and so I don't know, but that's something that we're thinking about. There are many, many, many communities in the US that are grappling with this issue. Some of the groups from the Midwest, the Squawky, I think, just got some seeds from the Field Museum that they're trying to also germinate. So this is an issue that many, many communities, especially like some of the Great Lakes communities where they're not growing their traditional varieties of corn anymore, are thinking about to try to bring back their heirloom or heritage seeds. And what's so amazing about Hopi is that, those seeds are still within the community. They have, because of how important corn is to Hopi, and because they were able to keep farming, and farming was so important, is still important to who they are. Their seeds are still within their communities. There's had conversations, there's a few types of beans that aren't grown as much, but when Susan and I started doing this project, and I was like, well, what are we going to do about people needing to see these collections? She's like, Lisa, you know, we still grow all of these corns that you still have in your collections, which is pretty amazing. Just a true testament to the importance of corn, and the skill and knowledge and wisdom of Hopi farmers.
Right, I have a few more questions here.
Okay.
Did you find other similarities between the Hopi traditions and those of the Midwest?
That is interesting. The different ways of preparing corn in the Midwest. There's a corn soup that's often used. One of the things that's interesting is that process of like making hominy. In the Midwest, they add ash from hardwood trees to boil the corn before they make the soup. And Hopi women often also use culinary ash when they make their piki bread. So ash is often important in cooking corn. It improves the nutrients of the corn. But the thing that was really striking to me was just thinking about corn as relative, and as sort of part of family and community, and in both communities, corn, sort of this idea that corn takes care of us and we take care of corn, and that's part of what we're supposed to be doing. So other traditions, again, I'm not an expert, and it's just been fascinating for me through the museum collections to hear that same sort of connections between with referring to corn as part of a family.
Okay, let's see. Is the only source of moisture to produce steam the corn itself? That's one. Yeah, I'll let you go.
Yeah, so that's an easy one to answer. We sometimes add a little bit of water into the corn roasting pit. It helps also the fire die down a little bit. So just a small amount of water. But again, I think this is like making a family recipe that each family may do things differently. And I don't know when Hopi corn is roasted, if it's different, since the sweet corn that the park is purchasing from the farm in Camp Verde is a hybrid corn, and I don't know if it has more moisture in it or not, but we do sometimes. Gwyn usually is the one that sort of squirts a little bit of water into the pit, but it's minimal, and it's usually just so that the corn on the bottom in particular won't burn.
Okay, I just have a couple more.
Yeah.
Let's see. How does your experience with the corn roasting pit at Himalavi compare with that shown in the film, The Hopi Corn is Life, assuming that it was consulted?
Yeah, so that was where I first learned about corn roasting pits, was from the Corn is Life video. Rewatched it again, very, very, very similar to that video. In fact, it's one of the videos that I ask my students when I first start introducing them to the cultural context of the collections they've been looking at. I ask them to watch that video, and then Susan video conferences in and talks to the students to add on to that. So it's a lovely, lovely introduction.
A quick question. Were the roasting pits, the corn roasting pits, used only during the harvest or used for other foods during the year?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I only know about them being used at the harvest time, and usually for sweet corn. Again, I'm not an expert on this, so that would be a really interesting question to ask Hopi family about their use of the corn roasting pit. And some of the pits are now located in villages, so they're often shared by the village. So again, if you get to meet a Hopi person and ask about corn roasting, I think that would be a lovely question to ask.
There is, by the way, some information that's been being shared through the chat. So
Yeah.
you can look at that later if you haven't seen that already. And quite a few comments in the question and answers, thank yous, and I'll share those with you later as well.
Great.
But there's one more. Are you thinking of continuing on the corn theme with the Hopi, such as planting, harvesting, teaching the next generation, drying, grinding, cooking, whatever? Where do you go from here?
Yeah, so the one picture I skipped through is Susan Sekakwaptoa, who I have worked with all these years, is now the agricultural extension agent at Hopi. And so she is doing that. And so she, during the pandemic, has produced some amazing videos on just farming and soil and lasagna beds and things like that. So Susan is really, they're listening to community needs, helping to teach the youth. She's restarted the 4-H clubs there with many community members' help. So Susan is helping to do all those things within the community, and lots of discussions about food preservation and things like that. There's also an organization at Hopi called Natwani that is also really promoting food and farming within the Hopi community, and that's where it needs to be done, is within the community itself. That said, one of the things that I've been doing while I'm here is talking to Susan and a recent PhD in linguistic anthropology to sort of talk about this amazing collection and what are our next steps, and what are other ways that we can share it, the collection with the community more broadly. It was shared with the farmers who were part of my project, the class that I was teaching several years ago, but hoping for lots of ideas of what we can do in the future. So we're just at the beginning stages of dreaming about how else we might work with the collections, and really thinking about the history of farming that's recorded within the interview notes, and Susan being great at getting community input and thinking about how we might start sharing them out, and to also involve all the other organizations at Hopi, like the Cultural Preservation Office and the Natwani Coalition. There's a Hopi Food Co-op, there's a Hopi Farmers Market. It's really lovely to see how much sort of grassroots movement there is within the Hopi community to be thinking about food and farming. And the other thing I learned when I was preparing for this talk that is just amazing to be back here at Arizona is that Arizona is, if not the top, right up there at the top in terms of the number of indigenous farmers in this state. I think the figure that I saw was there are 19,000 indigenous farmers in this state, and that more than half of the farmers and ranchers in the state of Arizona are indigenous. And that is so powerful. And I would encourage all of you who are interested in indigenous food and farming to do whatever you can to support the indigenous farmers. It's just amazing to be here, to be surrounded by so much indigenous history about food and farming. So would encourage everybody there's great resources here in Tucson, and just to support those indigenous farmers in any way that you can.
Thank you so much, Lisa. There is one comment that I'll just add. Douglas Johnson says, one simple ceremonial aspect of the roast is always that passing of the first year around to everyone who participated. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
So thank
Yeah.
you very much. And thank you, everyone. This video of this presentation will be on our YouTube channel within the next couple of days, hopefully. And we're grateful that you joined us tonight, and we hope to see you all in May. And with that, we'll close. And thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.